how to test ad creative in 2025, I am going to do something that has never been done on YouTube before. I'm not going to show you just one way to test your meta ads creative. I'm going to show you three because I believe this next statement to my core. The way that you test ad creative when you're spending $3 million per month is vastly different than when you're just starting off or you have a much lower budget. So let's jump into the ad account. I'm going to show you exactly how I test creative at these different levels for e-commerce. So let's start with the lower budgets and how I would structure creative testing for brands that are going to be spending anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per month, or even a little bit lower. And spoiler alert, at this stage, we are only using one campaign. So in theory, it's all creative testing, especially if you're just getting started. Now, I've actually set up a few first campaigns for some new brands recently, and this is exactly how I do it because you're able to get those first few initial creative learnings without overcomplicating the setup. So Dara here from the editing bay. Really quick, we are going to be going right for a sales campaign here that's going to be optimizing for purchases. There is no way, even if you are just starting off as a brand new brand, if you want to go after those purchases, we are not starting with traffic campaigns. We are not starting with engagement campaigns or add to cart campaigns. Meta's algorithm, it's so advanced in 2025 that you just have to tell it what you want to go after, which in this case is going to be those purchases. Now for brands and businesses that are on the lower end of this budget spectrum, I really like to limit the ad creative to 10. And generally, I really like to lean on primarily statics to get back those first few pieces of creative learnings. But oftentimes I'll include a UGC style ad or even a UGC style founders ad, especially if it's already in the vault and they already have this ad creative readily available. However, like I mentioned, I would really start focusing on statics just because they're a lot easier to make and you can get more of those messaging learnings that you can then roll into videos. But the type of statics I'd make sure that you are testing include benefit call out ads, us versus them, headline ads, ugly ad statics, testimonial statics. And again, if you already have video creative that performed really well on TikTok or Reels, that's also something that I would include in your initial rounds of testing. However, I wouldn't start testing a ton of new video until you start learning what type of messaging is actually converting your customers. Again, start with 10 ad creatives at those lower budgets, and then you can start to add another ad creative or two every single week. And I wouldn't worry too much about turning ads off unless they really aren't meeting your CPA goal and for some reason the algorithm is spending a lot on them. Otherwise, I would just let them run. Also, I know if you've seen some of my past testing videos, you might be surprised and even a little mad to hear that I'm using Advantage Plus shopping campaigns for testing at this level. But hear me out, I want to explain why. So number one, you can actually test more ad creatives more efficiently using an ASC campaign. Now, compared to the growth testing stage where you're likely going to be spreading out that budget across different ad sets and even a little bit across different campaigns, if you're just using one ASC, this is truly the most consolidated type of setup that you can have. Essentially, you want to make sure that your budget allows you to get out of the learning phase, and this setup will help you do that at that lower budget. And also, because you're allowed to test more creatives means more opportunities to convert your customers. So we are essentially able to, hey, have a more consolidated campaign, but have more ad creatives in that campaign underneath this setup. And number two, it's a way easier setup to manage. So if you're a solopreneur doing it all yourself, this is honestly the easiest way to run meta ads creative right now in 2025 is using one ASC campaign. This way you don't have to worry about adding ad sets, tinkering with audiences, trying to figure out retargeting or prospecting. It just keeps it all in one campaign. And I especially think if you are a brand new brand, this is really powerful. It also puts you in a much better position to, again, get those initial creative learnings and then be able to test other types of setups and account structures when you already have an idea about what works on the creative end, which is a really good thing to do because your creative is going to be your biggest lever on the platform. Before we dive into the second creative testing method, I want to share with you one of my new favorite tools, Particl, which has genuinely changed the way that I approach creative testing, especially at the growth and scale levels. Particl gives you real-time sales, pricing, and sentiment data on some of the world's top brands. And honestly, one of the biggest gaps that I see right now in creative testing is actually coming from the product and merchandising perspective, aka figuring out what types of products and bundles to test. Bundles is especially a huge one, which is why I really like looking inside of Particl to see what types of products are actually selling for brands. They have two new features that I want to share with you. Number one is the marketing asset library, where you can get a full snapshot of a brand's marketing from emails and website assets to social media creatives and yes, even ad creatives. And probably one of my most favorite features is events. Here you can see everything from site-wide discounts to product launches and even variant restocks all in one place. So lately, one of my big focuses as a creative strategist has been using meta ads and creative testing to explore better merchandising strategies for the brands that I work with. Even things like naming products differently or bundling different products together. Not too many people talk about this online yet, but this is honestly where a number of my recent wins have been. Knowing how to look at a product suite and which products to position or bundles to create to then showcase on meta ads is candidly expert tier creative strategy. And Particl helps me zero in on what's actually selling and how they're being marketed, which helps put me in a way better position to figure out how to implement those for my own brands. So if you work at a brand or you're doing research agency side, this is truly a no-brainer. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions at all about Particl. I am genuinely so passionate about this product and I would be super happy to help you out. All right, so if you are past that lean testing phase and you are consistently starting to spend $1,000 per day or $30,000 per month, or even up to $50,000 per month, you have entered into what I call the growth testing phase. So let's hop into the ad account and I can show you exactly what this looks like. Now, what you'll notice is that many ad accounts at this stage actually just have two core campaigns. In fact, you can and should just keep the ASC campaign that you had from the previous level, as long as there is performance, of course. Now, I'll say this ad account structure is widely accepted as a best practice now. Barry Hot even broke it down in his recent course, which was really awesome to see. But you'll see here that we've added a creative testing campaign. Now, this is a manual campaign, not an ASC. And when we pop inside, you'll actually see that every single test gets its own ad set. So instead of tossing 1 to 2 new ads into an ASC every time you want to test a creative, I actually create a new ad set here for each testing concept. And typically, I am going to be putting 3 to 6 ad creatives inside of each. So if you are on the lower end of that budget, go ahead and just put in 3. But if you're working with a little bit more budget, then sometimes that's where I see people testing 6 to 7 creatives. Now, I typically recommend $100 to $200 per ad set per day. And I'll say too, the question of whether or not you should use ABO or CBO is really a media buyer decision. I personally generally use ABO so that I can get a quick read on ad creatives by throttling that spend. So within a few short days, I know, hey, is this ad creative going to work or not? I don't have that looming question. But I know many brands that use CBO here really successfully. And I actually know of several 6 to 7 figure brands who actually use the one campaign method using this exact campaign. In fact, my business partner Miguel actually has a great YouTube video where he breaks down exactly how he does this for brands in that growth stage. It's a super effective setup, and it's absolutely another option that you have to test if you find that those ASC campaigns aren't working as well for you. Either way, CBO or ABO, your creative testing at the ad level is going to look exactly the same. And at this stage, yes, you're going to have some tests that are more focused on images, but I do find a lot of brands in this stage are concentrating a lot more on video. And again, each ad set is going to be its each individual creative test. And inside of that creative test, you're gonna have anywhere from 4 to 6 creatives or variations of those creative. And at this stage, I would have those variations take much bigger swings in your messaging. I actually mentioned this last year in the video, and it's something that I absolutely still do today. So for instance, you should do a creative test that's a little bit more like this, as opposed to doing something like this. And for videos, that's gonna be a really similar thing, except you're going to be testing out different hooks. Again, take those bigger swings. And I also see a number of brands testing out different lengths of video time here, which is something that I really like to play with as well. Now, ultimately, the structure as a whole is gonna do a few things for you. Number one, it's gonna isolate your creative testing from your scaling budget. So that ASC campaign is essentially going to become your scaling campaign. And what I like to do is when I find winners in the creative testing campaign, I'm gonna then duplicate those into the ASC campaigns. So it starts to become a campaign of winners. And having your testing in a different campaign from your scaling helps keep the data quite a bit cleaner. And it also stops from muddying performance with unproven tests, which ultimately is going to give you more stability across campaigns. I can't tell you how many times I've added a creative test to an otherwise performing campaign and I saw performance tank. Ultimately, this is going to give you a lot more stability across your campaigns. This structure also introduced variation testing, which is going to allow us to really zero in on what type of messaging and formats are really converting and allow us to get quite granular with what is actually going to make them convert. And the final reason, it's a great foundation for scaling. You have two campaigns, one that is an ASC that is starting to be compounded with a lot more winners, and you also have the creative testing campaign. And as you are building them up side by side, as long as they're getting performance, having those two campaigns is ultimately another way to scale. I used to call this horizontal scaling, where you are essentially adding in more ad sets or more campaigns, as opposed to vertical scaling, which is just increasing the budget. Ultimately, brands that grow need a little bit of both. All right, let's talk about creative testing for big budget brands, AKA brands that are spending more than $1 million per month on meta ads. So how exactly is this different from the growth stage? Well, I'm gonna be really honest. Functionally, as it relates to the creative testing campaign, it's not gonna be wildly different. Typically, you're still gonna see only one creative testing campaign inside of these accounts. Now, I've worked with brands spending $5 million per month, and they still just have one creative testing campaign. It's actually the things that are outside of that creative testing campaign that start to become a lot more complex. Now, I will say that a few creative agencies do require their own creative testing campaign. I'm not going to name any names, but they're only doing this for reporting reasons. It doesn't actually help things performance-wise. Another thing to note too is I often find at this stage, nearly all brands are using ABO. If you're actually working for one of these brands and you're not using ABO, let me know. I'm just a little bit curious about that. Now, I would still consider this a media buyer choice because I've seen a select few ad accounts recently that were successfully using CBO at scale like this. It's just not something that I see that often. And I imagine that's because the creative teams want to get a really quick read on their ad creative so that they can start iterating and ingesting learnings for their roadmap a lot more quickly. Another thing to note too is I often see brands at this stage testing using cost caps. Not all the time by any means, but really when you're starting to spend at these levels, you have a good idea of what your target CPA should be on meta ads. And if you already have a ton of great creative that's already performing well for you, you really want to make your additional creative tests really perform well and only get the best of the best, which is why you're going to likely add in that cost cap for those testing campaigns. Now, I'm not gonna leave you hanging once we get inside of Ads Manager. To be honest, the testing campaign is pretty much gonna be looking exactly the same as I showed you in the growth stage. And in theory too, when you're at this stage, you're gonna already have a really good idea about what's working, which is gonna help guide your overall strategy. I see most brands here launching creative tests at 200 per day, and then they'll let it run for 7 days or so, or maybe until it gets to 1,000. And of course, if you get an early read on a creative, you see that it's working really well, or you see that it's, totally tanking, they'll turn it off. But if they see it's working well, they'll start to scale it up as soon as possible, really. So what truly is the difference, right? It's primarily going to be volume. You're going to be testing anywhere from 10 to 20, sometimes even more creative tests per week. And it's not just more volume, it's also a little bit more refined, because at this stage, you already have a pretty good idea about what's working. So when you are doing more of that variation testing, you're actually going to be testing a lot more slight differences here, I'd say. You're going to be doing more things like this instead of those bigger swings that we were doing in the growth testing phase. And I'd also say here too, that the creatives that you're going to be testing are just going to become a lot bigger swings. So likely you're going to start testing into celebrities, into bigger influencers. You're going to be testing out some more higher production. Maybe you're going to do a high production founders ad if a lo-fi founders ad is something that you saw worked really well. When you are getting at the stage, it's really about diversifying the type of creative that you have and doing that at a higher volume. It's not an easy thing to do, and I will be so blunt. I've seen the back end and how many brands are working, and I'd say that we're all still learning the best methods to really make this work. So while the testing structure itself doesn't change a ton from the growth to scale stage, the complexity absolutely does. You're gonna have a lot more volume, a lot more creative diversity, which is why, your team is gonna look a lot different at this stage. I actually think that's candidly the biggest thing that is gonna change from that growth to scale stage is really the makeup of your team. And if that's something that interests you, please let me know in the comments. I can definitely make more content about that. Now, I find that most gurus online like to tell people that there's only one right way to do things on Meta ads. And I'm hoping that this video showed you that it's just not true. My goal with this video ultimately was to show you that there are multiple ways to succeed on this platform, which is really important to know when things don't seem to be working as well. Now, I'll be blunt, 9 times out of 10, you likely have a creative problem on your hands, especially if you're at those earlier stages. So don't throw in the towel immediately on the format if you're not getting a winner just yet. But I will say, if you're plugging along on Meta ads and it just doesn't seem to be working, try a different testing strategy. Because ultimately I found that one of the most important things to success on Meta ads is actually your mindset. You absolutely have to have a testing mindset and really truly be curious about what is going to make your customers convert. And I hope that this video gave you a little bit more insight into how I think about these things, which is absolutely different when I'm working with a brand that is completely new and launching their first Meta ads campaign to the brands that are scaling into the millions of ad sets that are scaling into the millions of ad spend per month. It is a completely different ballgame. Anyways, love you so much. See you next week. Bye.